producer, and as such, we are a net exporter of raw material and a net importer of finished goods and products. So obviously, one of the underlying opportunities for private sector is industrialization within Africa. We find with globalization, the competitiveness of African industry has declined significantly, and in most cases, almost African industries have been wiped out because it is cheaper to import manufactured products from other countries. Therefore, this framework lays down the first opportunity for Africa, which is value addition for industry, sharing raw materials from Africa, manufacturing products in Africa, first to be self-sufficient and eventually to be a net surplus exporter. What are the challenges for industrialization for Africa? Number one is incentive to producers of the raw materials. So within this protocol, we want to explore how do you give, especially if they're agro-based raw materials, how do you give incentives for the producers so that they do not exit production of essential raw materials? If I say in Kenya, for example, one of the tasks I had on behalf of the Kenyan government was to head our conglomerate that deals with investment in industry, which is known as the ICDC. And within ICDC, all foreign investors came in partnership with the government to set up industries, whether it is General Motors, whether it's Ever-Ready batteries, whether it is the textile mills. And over the years, we found that virtually all our textile mills closed down.
From Somalia, representing Somali Chamber of Commerce, as it is Vice President. Following remarks made by my colleague from Kenya, that he mentioned that Africa to prosper needs an industrialization, that's a hard fact that I totally agree. But to do that, we understand there is a lot of challenges here. Some of them he mentioned and some of them he did not mention. One of the crucial challenges that you have here is underdevelopment of infrastructure, lack of free movement of goods and services, the problem of travel access among the African nations. So since we have all these challenges available in Africa, including lack of roads, all these, my question is to Dr. Malaku. As we have AFCFTA program, Free Trade Zone Continental Africa, do we have any initiative for African Common Agenda focusing on how to develop African infrastructure first? To do that will facilitate to have to do a business easily, because if the African member states have a common agenda to discuss of developing an energy, developing roads, solving problems of free movement of goods and services, that will be fine. And thanks to private sector. For example, I'm from Somalia, and we are in a nation driven by private sector for a long time, 2 decades and plus. Our nation is driven by a private sector, and that is what the other parts of Africa taking place. But when it comes to the sovereign level of the countries, in other words, do we have a platform representing African private sector in general, that platform or body who could make an open, timely negotiation or discussion or dialogue to the AU member states?
To my brother Abdul Rashid, you mentioned the critical binding constraint that is infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. And you were referring to the need for support to regional infrastructure initiatives. I'm happy to announce that, there is a discussion on those agenda items. You have the NEPAD, which is the New Africa Partnership Development Program, which is at the level of the African Union, which basically designs all the continental infrastructure programs. They have the priorities of infrastructure programs, and we as the World Bank Group and other financiers support that program. So one example, in energy, you have the power pools in all the regions. So the World Bank, for example, the African Development Bank, the other banks, they support those power pools, both in terms of generation of electricity, but also in terms of interconnection between countries. So I thought that's important to highlight. And again, as I was mentioning right now, the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce has a role to play, in engaging with public authorities, regional authorities, to appeal for the interests of the private sector.
Mon nom est Naguib Sadiq, membre élu de la Chambre de commerce et homme d'affaires djiboutien. Moi, je vois le volume de business entre les pays d'Afrique ne sont pas assez, sont minimes. Il faut sortir de cette réunion, il faut un effet immédiat. Je crois qu'il y a beaucoup de choses à faire entre les pays d'Afrique et Djibouti dans la relation. Il faut aussi plus de facilité entre les pays. Il faut que les Africains profitent de Djibouti, puisqu'on a un port stratégique et on a un free zone parmi les meilleurs, les plus grands en Afrique, de l'Est et de l'Ouest. Djibouti, maintenant par exemple, comme mademoiselle l'a prononcé maintenant, si moi j'importe des produits de Kenya, les produits, le bateau va jusqu'en Europe et après retourner à Djibouti. Là, ça nous coûte $2000 par conteneur de 20 pieds. Pourquoi pas direct alors que Mombasa, Djibouti, ça ne prend pas 2 jours, 3 jours, c'est pas loin. En Afrique du Sud, la même chose. L'Afrique du Sud, pour emporter un conteneur, il fait le tour. Après, il revient à Djibouti. Et ça coûte dans les $3000 le conteneur. Moi, je crois qu'il faut qu'on sorte de cette conférence et qu'il y ait une décision immédiate. Il faut que tous les gens augmentent les business entre les pays d'Afrique et qu'il n'y a pas de barrières. Comme il avait dit là, on parlait de la monnaie africaine. Les ZEP, depuis 30 ans, c'est toujours pas... hein? Depuis 30 ans. Depuis 30 ans, on dit des dollars ZEP. Il faut qu'on se mette d'accord. Il faut prendre des décisions immédiates. Merci.
Thank you for the intervention from the floor. The first thing is that as an eternal optimist, I would like to give some more optimistic view on the future of Africa than perhaps we may be looking at. There are things that are happening, very positive things in Africa, but we don't sufficiently get to hear about them. And the reason is we do not have a Pan-African broadcasting network. A lot of the media is controlled from the West. For example, my brother here from Somalia, if you tell an average Kenyan to do business with Somalia, what is their perception is death and extermination. Yet Somalia has some of the best maritime exports of food, crabs, crayfish, name it, they come from Somalia. And we consume it in Kenya. But that is not the average perception. So my comments are two. Number one, Yes, I know we've talked a lot for a long time about the African Free Trade Area. But the difference is, at this conference now, we've come with ratifications. Countries have ratified. So this is no longer a talk. It is now the phase of implementation. And I want to tell you, I spent 20 years in Europe. The discussion to reach where the EU is today took much longer than this discussion on African free trade area. So that is the first thing I want us to know, that to overcome national perception and national interest, to sublime them into a continental level is an emotive issue, it is a political issue, it takes longer for people to accept. I was in Europe when the single currency came, and that was a very emotional discussion. So, I am not saying that I think we should start measuring it from today, where we come from here and we say, now we've got ratifications. Those countries that have ratified, can they move to the next stage of implementation? That's number one. The second positive thing, I want to talk about our brother from the US Africa diaspora. In Kenya today, the number one foreign exchange derivative for Kenyan government is not tea, is not coffee, is not horticulture. It is diaspora remittances from Kenyans all over the world. So for Africa, if we took all this and consolidated, the amount of diaspora remittance can transform this country. We don't need the foreign expensive loans. These are sons and daughters of Africa who remit, and Kenya has a very practical example. From the 17th of 19th of December, we have our annual diaspora conference in Nairobi. And now we are trying to see how can the government take advantage of this diaspora remittance for development. What about at Pan-African level? How much money can diaspora bring into Africa? That is something we need to mainstream into a policy and give them bankable opportunities. Now I come to the case of Djibouti. We had a very good presentation here by the advisor. He gave a very good of the Djibouti port. Unfortunately, we don't know much about each other in Africa. Even in Kenya, we don't know what Djibouti is doing in terms of modernizing its port. So the first thing we must do as Africa is that these projects, that must not be a Djibouti project. That project should be branded a Free Trade Africa Vision 2040 project, so that it becomes a Pan-African project which should be marketed across Africa. Because when we say it's a Djibouti project, we say that is Djibouti's problem. But if we say it's an African project, we look at it. So when we come to the issue of that has been talked about, I would just like to say one thing. From here, please, can we ratify the same way the heads of state have ratified and nations have ratified? Can we come up with a document of the next steps forward? That's all I have to say.
Entendu aujourd'hui qu'on a parlé beaucoup de l'entrepreneuriat, des business. J'ai pas entendu beaucoup de l'entrepreneuriat féminin. On est en Afrique, les mamans sont africaines, les chercheurs sont djiboutiennes et somaliennes. Donc j'appartiens à une institution femme chef d'entreprise de France. Je suis djiboutienne, donc faisant partie de la diaspora. J'ai pas entendu parler du programme que vous citez, l'Afrique prospère. Nous, on est les enfants d'Afrique. On est africains avant tout, même si on évolue, nos sociétés sont en France ou ailleurs. Aujourd'hui, j'estime qu'on doit s'appuyer sur l'expertise des enfants d'Afrique. Qu'est-ce que vous avez prévu pour ces enfants-là, qui ont prouvé leur expérience dans d'autres pays, dans ces programmes de l'Afrique prospère? Et est-ce qu'il y a un programme qui est destiné pour la formation des écoles communes? Qu'est-ce que je peux dire encore? Des formations sur la mobilité, parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est vrai que le point sensible, c'est peut-être le transport des marchandises, c'est très bien la logistique. Moi-même, je suis transporteur, donc je sais de quoi je parle. Mais aujourd'hui, il faut accompagner la mobilité des personnes. Pour aller en Éthiopie, pour aller en Somalie, c'est très, très compliqué. Est-ce que l'infrastructure régionale dans ces programmes prendra une place importante? Qu'est-ce qui est promis? Parce que si on ne peut pas former et avoir des compétences, parce qu'aujourd'hui, quelqu'un qui est compétent à Djibouti, il peut aller travailler en Côte d'Ivoire, il peut travailler peut-être en Somalie, donc la formation. Et au niveau de la mobilité, qu'est-ce qui est mis en place dans ces volets-là?
Maintenant, à Madame Yadi, vous avez parlé des risques que toute entreprise, que ce soit petite ou grande, rencontre. Mais ce sur quoi je voulais insister, c'est que souvent en Afrique, on surestime ce risque-là. La perception est surestimée. Et donc, je pense que ce qu'il faut, c'est de prendre un sursaut, de prendre un peu plus de risques pour venir, pour essayer. Parce que ceux qui viennent, ils voient que l'environnement est profitable. Donc, ils restent. Mais quand on est à l'écart, on perçoit le risque avec toutes les notations qui se font par les institutions. On se dit, ah là là, si on va se casser le nez. Mais je pense qu'il faut prendre davantage de risques. Bon, je comprends que pour une toute petite entreprise, ça peut être demandé un peu plus. Mais je voulais insister sur ce point.